I'm Mary Starr with the Wait to Truth podcast. We're delighted to have today as our guest Jeff Etter. He has an incredible story going back to literally the beginning of COVID and all the way into the January 6th event that happened on Capitol Hill. So he comes at this from a unique perspective, and he has an innate sense of what is social justice. And I think in today's environment, that's an incredibly impactful topic. So, Jeff, I'd like you to start, please, with early 2020 when you were let go from your job. Your gym became your primary focus.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Mary. And it's great to finally meet face to face.
Yes.
I do have a story, and I've gone the last 4 years without really talking about it or talking to anybody. So I will warn you on this too. There may be points where I get a little emotional on this
It's okay.
because it has affected me profoundly. But going back to 2020, mid 2020, of course, COVID changed a lot of things for a lot of people, for everybody. Had a very long and successful career in medical device sales. Started in pharmaceutical sales for a couple years, transitioned into medical device sales, worked for some really big companies. I spent a lot of time in the operating room. I was doing implantable neurostimulators for the latter half of my career. When COVID hit, I was with a startup company. We only had partial FDA approval. I was one of the first sales hires. I helped train the entire organization. And the CEO of my company during this time when COVID started had some very disparaging remarks numerous times over email to the entire organization about President Trump's handling of COVID. And I responded tactfully and respectfully to him. And just about the morale of the company, I let him know that I also ran a gym on my own time, which I think most people were already aware of that at that time. And unfortunately, we had a tragedy where one of our friends of the gym took their own life during this time. We had a lot of members who were stuck out at sea and weren't allowed to come back because I live in a very heavily military Navy community. 2 weeks later, I was let go. He told the company I was let go due to lack of performance, which couldn't have been further from the truth. Fortunately, somebody sent me a recording of the Zoom meeting that he had. And of course, I have the receipts to back that up. We won a lawsuit against this. And then I put all of my efforts into running my CrossFit gym during a very challenging time to run a gym. I will say this, I never actually ever for the entirety of my gym made 1 penny from it. Never took anything, never made. I paid a manager, I paid coaches. My primary motivation was twofold. I wanted to help people. I really truly enjoyed doing that. CrossFit and just the gym that we ran, we helped a lot of people, both mentally and physically, change their lives around, extend life, extend joy. And it was sort of my way to give back. But it was also selfishly right up the street from me, and I liked working out. So it was very convenient. And that's why I really wanted to keep it open originally. Of course, right after this happened, in April is when they started shutting everything down. If you were a member of the military, you were not allowed to go to a gym and work out. In fact, they were punished pretty severely if they were caught doing this. I kept my gym.
I'd like to interject one thing. I failed to mention in the introduction that you also are former military. So thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you very much. Yes, I served in the Army. I was a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne Division. Enjoyed my time. Almost stayed in, but I ultimately got out and decided to go to college and go a different route. But I appreciate you saying that. Um, I really wanted to keep the gym open to truly help people, but I also had a sense very early on that what was happening, that what we were seeing was not right. I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't know how to articulate it. I have family members that worked in the medical community that I think was sort of even creating a divide between us, but I could see it. And even though I couldn't necessarily articulate it, I knew that something was going on, and I could feel the presence of evil intertwined with this. And I knew that I couldn't just stand in the shadows. I knew that I had a responsibility to the people that we served in that gym community to keep it open. So our gym got visited several times by the police. The last time we had a SWAT team show up. Yeah, I don't, whether it's a SWAT team or people dressed in tactical gear coming in, certainly to intimidate while I had a gym full of people. I still didn't close down. I was lucky that I wasn't arrested then, but I was willing to be. That's how strongly I felt about it, to make a point when everybody was sort of complying, right? Complying everywhere we go. I felt a moral responsibility and duty to myself and to others to not comply with that, right? Because I felt like compliance in that situation was going to hurt a lot of people
I want
more
to
than it
ask a
would.
question. Let me ask a question. You mentioned a couple of minutes ago that members of the military were basically forbidden to work out, which to me is like an
Yeah.
oxymoron. But was there ever any explanation or logic given for that order?
Well, it was driven by slogans, right? Stop the spread. Whatever the things that they were saying right there, nobody really ever looked into anything, but you saw a very powerful, overwhelming messaging surrounding this, no matter where you looked, whether it was the messaging through the media. And I was always, I would see these clips that people would do where there was 12 different media outlets and they were saying verbatim the same exact things, right? That's not organic. That's not an organic approach to messaging. That is very strategic. And when I see things like that, I immediately think that's just not right. And I'm somebody that's always just been very curious and somebody that's also skeptical as well. So I generally don't believe, my default position is I don't believe you, or I don't believe what's happening right now. And I want to try to figure something out. And nothing was adding up. Nothing made sense to me. Even the people that were saying, that were masking up, that were saying these things were also sort of saying, yeah, it's kind of BS. Like we saw with the politicians, like we saw with Gavin Newsom, like we saw with Whitmer in Michigan. They would say one thing and their messaging was all the same. And then they would be caught in restaurants,
Oh,
unmasked with their
I
with their
love
friends.
I love the restaurant rule. Okay, you have to wear your mask as you walk to the table, but immediately when you sit down in your chair and you're, 3 feet lower than you were, you can take it off and it's okay. You can take it off to eat.
Right.
Where is the
And
logic?
in my brain, and I think I'm either too dumb or too smart to not be like in the middle with this. I don't know which one it is. I'm probably too dumb, but none of these things made any sense whatsoever. You're going to tell me if I stay 6 feet away from this person right now in this line, then we're not going to get each other sick. Nothing made sense. But so many people went along with it because they were so afraid to go against the grain. And I just wasn't, God did not bless me with that. And maybe bless isn't the right word, but
I think it is.
I've always had an innate sense to go against the grain and be skeptical and speak out.
Can I just call it what it is, Jeff? It's called common sense.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well,
Yeah, it's common sense is, I never would have said this until 5 years ago, but common sense is not as prevalent as you might think.
no, it's
In
not.
fact, yeah, I would say it's
No, I would agree with that. Another one of my favorites during COVID was going to the grocery store and they had one-way signs on the aisles, like you can push your cart
right.
one way. And it's like, how is that going to make a difference which way I'm pushing my cart on this aisle? And I will just admit, I was one of those that I would just invariably, darn, I would go the wrong way down those aisles. I couldn't seem to get it right on the arrows.
Right. But
I'm
most people did. Most people did it. They just complied because, well, I mean, I don't really know why. I think that there's multiple reasons, right? We're sort of ingrained to not want to go against the grain. We want to fit in with others. We don't want to be chastised by our peers for going against that. So instead, we'll do the dumbest, most nonsensical things so that we don't appear crazy, right? How crazy is that? We'll do crazy, stupid things because everybody else is. So going against that and doing the thing that is actually common sense will get you labeled all kinds of things. Now, that didn't bother me very much. There was a time in my life where I think I just stopped caring about that.
Well, I'll say this, that as we have birthdays click by, that goes away. You care less and less about what other people think as birthdays
Yeah.
pile up.
Yes, I agree. I agree for sure.
That's very interesting. I really appreciate your perspective on that. And it is a perfect lead in to the next topic that we're going to cover today, your involvement in January 6th. So what was your reason for going to the J6 event?
So I really went sort of on a whim that I made the decision just a few days prior to this. And one of the big reasons is I connected with a friend that I hadn't talked to in at least 10 years who also lived in Virginia. we happened to connect. He was in another state up north for the holidays, and he was on his way driving back. And one of us sort of jokingly said, "Hey, let's meet up in DC for the rally that's happening there." And so we were like, "Cool, let's do that." And that's what we ended up doing. So we got a hotel room. I drove to Northern Virginia, took a train in, and we got in the evening of the 5th, and we walked around. And let me tell you, that was eye-opening in itself. The night before, I hadn't been to DC in a very long time, not at least not to walk around. I'd probably been there for work in a couple of the few years prior to that. But some of the things that I saw up there, I'll never forget. And one of those things is this: we were standing, and I don't even know what they call it, sort of that BLM Plaza. Maybe that's what the name was. And we were walking around there, and there were some people, certainly leftists, that were, I don't know how else to explain or describe them other than demonic. The way that they were shouting, the way that I could just see their eyes and their face was something I got a pit in my stomach seeing this. But I stood around and I watched. And there was a young lady and her mom that were there. And I think that they were wearing Trump hats. And they got surrounded by these people. And now there were no shortage of cops. They didn't do anything. They were just watching, right? But they were in their faces yelling. And I thought, well, this is very, very aggressive, where I almost approach. And the friend I was with, who pulled me back numerous times from things, and I thank him for that. I'm like, this is just crazy. Well, she ended up pulling out a taser and just flashing it. And the moment she did that, she got swarmed by the cops, just pounced on and handcuffed. And I thought, what is happening right now? We continued it, and so they took her off. But around us, there were just people that were just doing the most vile, disgusting things. We were walking around somewhere. There was a group of people who saw this, went up to some people at a restaurant. They were dining outside, and they just not physically assaulted them, but it was an older white couple, and they were just screaming at them. And there were cops, and I just thought, how is nothing being done about this? And so there was a group of people, and myself included, that went up and stopped them from doing this. I was being very careful at the time. They pulled out a phone to record, and I swatted the phone out of his hand and sent it sailing. I thought for sure when I did that, I was going to get pounced on by the cops. I didn't at that time. There was part of me that wonders or even hopes or wished, maybe I wish that I would have got arrested or something that night, and it would have stopped what had transpired over the next 4 years. But that didn't happen. But it made me angry. It made me really angry because I never witnessed that with my own eyes. I saw, of course, the BLM protests. I saw the far left protests, the mostly peaceful ones in nature with the flames in the background and the broken windows, but it was mostly peaceful. I'm saying that very, very sarcastically, obviously, but I saw it with my own eyes, and I got a sense of the evil that surrounds it because I could truly feel it. It was palpable.
Wow.
And the next day, and by the way, January 6th was the first and only political rally I have ever been to in my entire life. So I've went to exactly one political rally, and it just happened to be the mother of them all.
Didn't exactly end well for you. Let me ask you a question, going back to what you were talking about. Do you have a sense that possibly the police officers had been given a stand down order if they saw anything being perpetrated against people who appeared to be on the right?
I don't see any other way. I don't see any other way. How they could witness this screaming and um, I'll say in assaultive posture, with no intervention. It just doesn't make any sense. And of course, we were in um, a heightened sense of news cycle, right? That was very pro-left, right? Because all of the BLM stuff was happening at this time. So any perceived motion or action against the left was going to be brought to the forefront of the media. And I think that people were very, very, very afraid of that. not necessarily the cops themselves, right? But politicians on both the left and the right were terrified of any of this happening. So any perceived action against the left was going to be taken very, very seriously. But you did say something that I wanted to address. You said something about that I wished or that should have never happened. And we'll get into this. And it took me a long time. That may have been the best thing that day that ever happened to me. And I'll explain that in a little while. And I'll probably get a little choked up.
That's fine.
But it is on one hand, right? I spent a lot of time with regret, wishing this and wishing that, but I can't change. I can't change what happened. No matter how many nights I stayed up praying and wishing things were different, it wasn't going to change anything. But we can get into that here as the story unfolds a little bit. So, um, yeah, going. So, yeah, I really did get that sense that there was sort of a standout order. It just didn't make any sense to me at all. And I got a really just an odd sense in just the fiber of my soul that something was off, that I could feel the presence of evil around there. And I've always sort of felt like I could feel that, that I wouldn't know how to explain that a couple years ago, but it's the Holy Spirit
Yes,
telling and warning you about what you're around is not normal. It's not good. It's evil.
I have experienced that. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's just you can't articulate it, but you feel it and you know it.
Right. Right. And I got such a strong feeling of that. Obviously not strong enough that I didn't leave that night, but we stayed. And so the next day we went out to whatever it was called where the rally was being held. And I was absolutely amazed. I've never seen that many people in my whole entire life. And I grew up in a tiny little town in the middle of nowhere. So seeing that was really like I was in just awe of how many people were there. And generally when there's that many people, things can get chaotic, right? And at least at that time, it was very peaceful. And I could have left my stuff out. I could have left my wallet out and probably not even worried about somebody stealing it. Now, it was cold. It was chilly. The weather was not good. There was a lot of people. I was so far back, I couldn't even hear the speakers, but I wanted to stay. And after it was over, me and my friend were actually just going to go back to the train. We were going to go back, take the train and go back to Virginia and get in our vehicles and go home. We actually literally went the other way of the crowds. My friend was wearing a hat that said Iraq War veteran. And as we were walking, there was a couple of guys that had a big black plastic crate and they were pulling a giant flag out of it. And they said, "Hey, are you guys veterans?" And we both said yes. And then they said, "Hey, will you help us unfold this flag?" And so we're like, "Sure, we'll do that." And now some more people started kind of gathering around at this point and unfolding the flag. And then it was like, "All right, let's carry the flag now." So at this point, right, on one point, we were going to leave, but now we're under a flag walking through the streets of DC. I really didn't know where we were going actually, but I assumed at that point everybody was going to the Capitol because that's where, the streets were filled and that's where everybody was going. And I don't know how else to explain this other than something came over me. And it was liberating in a sense that it was like, all right, like I feel alive right now. And I hadn't felt that in a little while, right? Because I was so used to from getting terminated from my job to the gym trying to be shut down. And I'm like, wow, I feel alive. I'm here with like-minded people that care about our country and aren't afraid to show it. And I kept going and we carried the flag and carried it up the steps of the Capitol, which I had never intended to do. And so we ended up getting up there. At this point, I end up getting towards the front. And when you were up there, you're stuck. There was nowhere else to go at all. And so we were up.
I'd like to ask you a question. Had you encountered any kind of barriers, fencing, police
No,
officers, any barrier to where you were headed?
not a single barrier, no signs, no police officers, nothing. The only police officers that we saw were once I was up front, and there were officers kind of scattered throughout. The ones with like the neon vests on, not the ones with all of the SWAT gear. And things were peaceful. People were chanting USA. There was nothing crazy happening. There was sort of a scuffle that broke out where somebody was, they were saying this guy's Antifa, whatever. So there was a little bit of that. I didn't get involved in that, but it was getting even more tighter and pushed in. And so myself, I started asking the police officers, were like, we obviously can't go anywhere. Can we go in? And they were like, so they said yes. So they were like, I don't know, you like the doors were wide open at this point. The doors were wide open. It was apparent that people had already been in. The windows were broken, obviously. I looked at that and I thought, well, that's not good, right? And the doors were open, but we didn't have anywhere to go. And so I was one of the first that was up at the open door. And people at this point, they weren't like trying to push past anything. Everybody was being respectful. And we were, myself included, asking, can we come through? Can we come in? Because we couldn't go anywhere else. And I was specifically asking, can we come through? I didn't know what it was like anywhere else. In my mind, can we go through the building and go out the backside? Right. And so it was about a minute or two. And the cops at the front door started radioing. A supervisor came up and he waved us in. So we started walking peacefully behind him, and he was telling the other officers to stand down. I'm going to pause there for a second. And if you remember when Tucker Carlson released the footage that Speaker Johnson said, okay, we're going to release some more footage, Tucker Carlson got out and said, hey, you've seen this footage. Here's the rest of the story. So one of the first clips that he showed was that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there I am. And you see me, but he's doing this to say, look, it was peaceful. There's a lot to this that you're missing. And so we came in. I kind of gathered in the lobby, maybe it was the rotunda area, I guess that they call it. And people there, I didn't witness anything. There was nobody being stupid. There were cops all around there. People were shaking the cops' hands. They were talking to them. I was in there for about 30 minutes, roughly, just standing around, videoing a little bit. And then that's when the riot gear police came and pushed everybody back out. I ended up going out through the broken window next to the door because it was so tight. I was just trying to get out as quickly as possible. Shortly thereafter is really when all hell broke loose. And that's when they started firing tear gas and bullets into the crowd. I got hit in the back with one of those. I think it was one of those CS bullets. I got hit with a flashbang in the back of my leg that burned my pants. And then I ended up taking the spray right in the face somehow. I don't even know where it came from. And I tell you, that was incredibly painful. And that really stopped me dead in my tracks for about another 30 minutes. I couldn't see, I couldn't move, I couldn't do anything. And by the time I started recovering, is really when they started pushing down on us. We couldn't go anywhere. There was an elderly man bleeding profusely from his head, and they were hitting him. And I pushed myself. And if you read the statement of facts, I did get a little mouthy and use some colorful language at that point. I would say probably both before we went in, because there was another situation, but mostly after. And I was witnessing this, and I'm like, I don't understand what's happening because nobody was being violent. I didn't witness any of what you see on the media, what they showed. I didn't see any of that. I did see it sort of the other way around now. And so I kind of got in the middle and never, so thankful that I didn't raise my hands or I didn't do anything to even put my hand to make contact with somebody. But it was close, right? Not intentional, like I was going to assault somebody, but I witnessed this going on, and I'm like, well, I don't understand why you're hitting an elderly man, and women. And so ultimately, we ended up getting pushed off, and that's sort of where it ended. We kind of hung out there for a little bit, and then we were like, well, I guess that was that. And now during this time, I couldn't get on my phone at all because I had no cell phone service because they shut down all the towers around there. But what I found out later is that you could connect. So the only place that I got cell phone service was in the Capitol building. And that's when I started getting text messages, and people were like, where are you? What's going on? Are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, like it didn't really dawn on me that this was a huge event. And it actually didn't really until about a month later, because I didn't even really watch the news or anything after that. In fact, I had stopped watching the news several years prior to this. I just didn't. I got rid of cable. I didn't watch anything. I didn't really follow anything. I was on social media. I read stuff on the internet, but I didn't watch the news. And so it was about a month later is when I started and it was literally like one day that it kind of hit me like, this is bad. And I started then seeing what was happening to people. I started seeing, wow, they are raiding people's homes with
Okay.
overwhelming.
I'm sorry, finish what you had to say, and then I've got a question.
Yeah. And I started getting very concerned at that, and I started then watching as much as I could. The Gateway Pundit started putting a section on their website, the American Gulag, and I became obsessed with this and following everybody, and I started really getting closed off and shut down, and spent a lot of time watching this. So I'll pause there and let you.
Okay. So from that point, how long was it until you were arrested and
Yeah.
charged?
So, okay, I was visited by the FBI on February 23rd, 2022. I wasn't home. My wife was homeschooling my kids at the time, and the FBI showed up. I happened to be at a doctor appointment, which it was like the first time I went to a doctor in years. I just never go to the doctor. I just happened to be there. And she called my phone 3 or 4 times. And I knew it. I knew why she was calling me. I could feel it. And it was so, my heart was racing. Now, at this time already, this is February 23rd, 2022. At this point, I've already spent almost the last year living my days and nights in total anxiety. Now, I started noticing things. There were vehicles being positioned outside of my house. I live on a court, a quiet court, and I started seeing this. And so my wife knew everything, and my wife is an amazing woman, by the way, and such a strong Christian woman and supportive in every way.
Good for you.
So God truly blessed me with a wonderful woman. But that feeling of anxiety, just knowing something was going to happen, and I didn't know when. I didn't know, and at the time, so my boys were 7 and 9 at the time, or 6 and 8. I didn't know how long I was going to be taken away for. What was going to happen? Right? They're gonna come in and kick down the doors. I'm going to be gone. I saw people being charged with 23, 25 years of felonies. And so I didn't know what it was how long I would be gone for. And at the time now, I started a marketing agency, and I did that for a little while. It was sort of a niche agency, and I gave that up because it was actually doing fairly well. But I'm like, if they take me away, how's my wife going to be able to handle this? So I stopped it, and it was very tough. Now, to finish the rest of that question, it was exactly 1 year later that I got arrested. Now, I didn't get my home raided, and I'm lucky on this, and I really think it's because I hired a good attorney. I had the foresight, not only the foresight, but I had been blessed with the financial means. I've done well throughout my career, and I've lived below my means. So I was in a position financially where I knew what was going to happen, and I retained an attorney. And we talked on February 23rd, 2022, and he said, don't talk to him. I'll handle it. Just there's no upside to you talking to the FBI at all. And so I didn't hear anything for 1 year. And now, oh, by the way, this is my mom's birthday, February 23rd. So exactly 1 year later, February 23rd, the next birthday of my mother, I get a call. My attorney's name pops up on my phone, and it rang twice and hangs up. And of course, now I'm a absolute wreck. And I'm thinking, maybe he called me by accident. He just hung up. But in the meantime, I'm just praying. I'm literally on my face praying at this point. And about 5 minutes later, he calls again. And I'm just like, I don't know how to explain. I was numb. I was just numb. And so he gets into the conversation like, hey, are you at work? And I'm like, well, I'm at home. And he's asking like, is there a place you can sit at? And at this, I'm like, my man, just tell me what you need to say. And this conversation at this point seemed like I was on the phone for about 30 minutes as he's right. But it was in reality about 30 seconds. I knew what was coming. I just needed to hear it. Now, thankfully, he said, the good news is that they're charging you with 4 misdemeanors, right? The standard 4 misdemeanors, which right there was a big relief to me, right? Because I didn't
Sure.
know what I was going to be charged with. I can tell you this, there were people probably that did a lot less or that were even more benign than myself that got charged with more. And I don't know why that is. And I don't know if it's because it was my attorney. I don't know if it was just simply by the grace of God that I got lucky with this. Now, I'm leaving out a really big part of this. So I'm going to go
I want to,
back.
okay, before we do that, I have a question.
Sure.
Did you ever sweep your house to determine if the FBI left any bugs planted behind from when they paid the first visit when you were at the doctor and your family was home alone? Do you know if they bugged your house?
I don't. I actually know it. I I didn't, nor did I ever look. But I am with a very high degree of certainty that I was surveilled because I could tell, and I've got a good sense of this, whether it was my military training, but I know when I'm being watched, and I know when things are odd. And there were vehicles numerous times outside of my home for extended periods of time. So I'm going to step back to sometime in February or March of 2021. Now, I've spent most of my life proclaiming to be a Christian or going to church, and I married a very strong Christian woman. And whether I was truly saved, I don't know. It doesn't really matter now, I guess. But I don't know. I guess I wanted that to at least be my lifestyle. I wanted to associate or be known as being a Christian, I guess. But I can tell you this, I never read the Bible. I went to church and I could talk the talk. But in sometime in February or March, when I just felt so scared and so anxious, I was in the shower one night. I've got a stand-up shower in the master bathroom, and I looked down at the floor, and it was covered in blood. It was red, just covered, and I was like, "What's happening right now?" And I couldn't figure it out. The whole bottom was just red, and of course, with the rain, with the water coming down, it just looked a lot worse than it was. And so finally, I figured it out. My ankle was sliced wide open, and I have no idea how that ever happened. And I just started crying. Tears came down my face. And I got out of the shower and I wrapped it up, still naked to my God, naked to the world. And I got down on my face. I'd never done this before. I got down on my face and I prayed. And I don't know what I said, but it was something like, "Lord God, like, I can't do this. I just surrender everything to you." And it wasn't eloquent. But it was true and it was sincere.
It's from your heart.
It was from my heart. And I can tell you this, the most radical change occurred in that moment, and I could feel it. And it didn't just radically change me in that moment. It has radically changed me from that moment forward.
That's an incredible testimony. Thank you for sharing that. That was not something I expected to hear today, and I thank you for the courage you've exhibited in sharing that. That's a powerful story.
Yeah.
All by itself.
Thanks for watching the Awake to Truth podcast. Visit our website at awaketotruth.org and connect with Mary Starr on X at awaketotruth_ and on Rumble at Awake to Truth Ministries. The Awake to Truth podcast, a beacon of hope in a world shrouded by shadows.